So here we are again, another episode of Tips and Tricks for Your Mix Mondays. I'm your host, Brother Rue. Last week we were talking about how to mix your kicks. This week I'm starting a new series which I'm calling Creating Space. What do I mean by creating space? Well, naturally our ears assume that we hear music or any kind of sound 50% from the left, 50% to the right. Naturally, that's what we think. But our brain is actually interpreting different sounds at different times, especially when the image is in stereo. So how are we going to get a stereo image? Well, the answer is pretty simple. We're going to create space, and that's what we're going to learn today. So we're going to go ahead and open up our studio in this little track that I made right here. I made it for J-Rock. He's going to be doing a song to this. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to assume that we've already mixed the kicks, because when I mix down, I always start with the kicks because I want to make sure that's the one thing that cuts through everything. So in the last tutorial, we learned how to boost those frequencies and cut out the frequencies we don't need. And then, then we have exactly what we need as far as kicks are concerned. Now it's time to create space. When I say create space, don't think too hard about it. Think about what kind of room you envision your song being recorded in, if that makes sense. Basically, do you want your song to sound like it was recorded in a concert hall? Do you want it to sound like it was recorded in a soundproof room? All those come into play. So you got to choose which one you want. And the first way that you create space or start creating your room size is through reverb. Now, before reverb, we have to understand that everything that we mix when we start creating space has to be in mono. When I very first got started, everything that I did was always in stereo or at its original setting. Well, when we mix down, you want to keep it in mono. Mix everything in mono. Okay, so right now I've already pre-EQ'd this snare. So I'll let you take a listen to the snare. Sorry, without the reverb. Okay. Now, it sounds good, but we want to create some kind of space. And like I said, the way you do that is with reverb. Now, I'm going to go over the parameters with you. The high cut would basically be the treble of the tail end of the reverb. The low cut would actually be the bass of the tail of the reverb. Okay, the last part of the reverb that you hear, like the actual spacing of it. You're going to either have treble or you're going to have bass. Okay, the pre-delay function here is awesome if you want to actually make it sound like it's bouncing off a little bit. But basically, pre-delay is just a reverb that hits before the actual reverb is released. That's what a pre-delay does. The size, obviously, I go up and down with it. You can have it in a very small tube, looking like tube here, or you can have it kind of like if you were in a booth or something, or you can just have it like you're in a big circular room that have bass traps all around. Okay. Diffusion is how many times the sound is gonna bounce off. Okay. If we have it here, let's put it in a cube. If you had it right here, it would be like you being in an empty room in a new house, and you're talking and you hear that reverb. That's what that would be like. Okay. The bass is just another functionality of how the reverb is going to sound. So if you want more of a bassier reverb, you're going to want to turn that up. Now the crossover is how it's going to cross over from being a low cut to a high cut. The decay is how long the reverb is actually gonna hold its space, excuse me. And then the damping is how bright you're gonna want to have it. Now, in FL Studio, in the stock plugin, it has an option to keep it in mono or in stereo. But for right now, we're gonna keep it right there. Now, the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna turn down the wet signal all the way down, and I'm also gonna put the diffusion back up to, you know, right there. Good, decent size room. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and press play. Okay, so we still have a dry signal. Okay, now watch what happens when I put up the wet signal about 38%. Okay, now you're starting to hear a snare that sounds like it's in a room, like it was recorded somewhere in a space, and that's what we're doing. We're creating space. So I mean, I don't want that much space though, so I'm gonna bring this down to about 16%. And that sounds pretty good. Now remember that this is still in mono over here on the mixer. So what we're gonna do from here is we're gonna let it play, and I'm gonna slowly start bringing this into a stereo image. And then I'm gonna leave it about right there. Now, if we bring in the kick that comes along with that, even though the kick's not mixed yet, but you'll understand how much reverb can start creating space inside your mix. Okay, so this is without the reverb. Okay, this is with the reverb. And there you have it. Same thing would happen with your hi-hats, percussions, snares. Now note, not every track is gonna need reverb on everything, like snares, your hi-hats, your crashes, because a lot of things actually sound good with no reverb. You have to kind of pick, you know, which ones need reverb, which ones don't need reverb. And that's pretty much it for creating space, at least within the percussion, the drum part of everything, the snare parts of everything. But the snare, I believe, is probably the best way to actually start to get an idea of how big you want your space to be inside of your mix. Does it mean the bigger your space, the better the mix? Not always. The best thing you can do is listen to your ears. If you listen to your ears and it sounds good to you, then it's gonna sound good, and you have to believe in that. So basically that's it. We'll get into part 2 of creating space, where we actually start diving inside plugins to make sure that our space within our plugins are matching the space that we're creating within our mix and our drums. So until then, you guys have a very blessed day, and we'll see you again for tips and tricks for your Mix Mondays.